The train whistle echoed across the vast Oklahoma prairie as a young woman, her face streaked with tears and one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, stood alone on the wooden platform of Claremore Station. Bridget Walters clutched her worn shawl tighter against the autumn chill of 1882, her eyes scanning the horizon where the railroad tracks disappeared into a golden sunset. The promise of Tulsa, just 20 miles away, had brought her this far, but with her husband 6 months in the grave and a baby due in less than 2, she wondered if her journey had been in vain. The last passenger had departed the station nearly an hour ago, and the station master had already locked up for the night, casting a pitying glance in her direction before heading home to his warm supper. Bridget remained, her small trunk containing everything she owned at her feet as darkness began to settle over the territory. "Madam, you waitin' on someone?" The deep voice startled her, and she turned to face a tall man astride a chestnut mare. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but even in the fading light, she could tell they were of good quality. I was supposed to meet my husband's cousin," Bridget replied, her voice betraying her exhaustion. "He promised to take me in after Samuel passed, but it appears he's had a change of heart." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching with a respectful distance maintained. Now that he was closer, she could see his eyes were a striking blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "Zeke Armstrong," he said, tipping his hat. "I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of Tulsa." "Bridget Walters," she replied, nodding slightly. Zeke's gaze fell to her belly, then to the lonely trunk at her feet. Without another word, he stepped forward, lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, and secured it to his horse. "Let's go home, Mrs. Walters," he said softly. "There's a storm brewing, and you shouldn't be out here alone in your condition." "Home," Bridget whispered, confused. "But we've only just met, Mr. Armstrong." "I've got a spare room at my place," Zeke explained. "My sister Mary lives with me. She's expectin' her husband back from a cattle drive in a few weeks. You'll be safe there until you figure things out." As if to emphasize his point, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the prairie. "I couldn't possibly impose," Bridget began, but Zeke gently cut her off. "My ma would rise from her grave and tan my hide if I left a pregnant widow out here with a storm common," he said with a small smile. "It's no imposition, just Christian charity." A fat raindrop landed on Bridget's cheek, quickly followed by another. With few options and the baby kicking restlessly inside her, she accepted his outstretched hand and allowed him to help her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance while still providing support with one arm. "Thank you, Mr. Armstrong," Bridget said as they set off, the first heavy drops of rain beginning to fall in earnest. "Zeke," he corrected gently. "Folks round here just call me Zeke." The journey to Zeke Armstrong's ranch passed mostly in silence, save for the rhythmic hoofbeats of his horse and the increasing patter of rain. Bridget was acutely aware of his presence behind her solid, strong, and surprisingly comforting. She had not been this close to a man since Samuel died, and guilt mixed with an unexpected flutter in her chest. By the time they crested a small rise, rain was falling in sheets. Through the downpour, Bridget could make out the outline of a substantial 2-story farmhouse, a large barn, and several outbuildings. A warm light glowed from within the main house, like a beacon guiding them home. "That's it," Zeke said near her ear, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Armstrong Ranch. Not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine, free and clear." A woman appeared in the doorway as they approached, silhouetted against the golden light. As they drew closer, Bridget could see she was tall and slender, with the same striking blue eyes as Zeke. Zeke Armstrong. What in heaven's name? The woman's scolding died on her lips when she spotted Bridget. Oh, you've brought company. Mary, this is Mrs. Bridget Walters, Zeke said as he dismounted, then helped Bridget down carefully. Mrs. Walters, my sister Mary Thompson. She was stranded at the station, Zeke explained, retrieving Bridget's trunk. Her people didn't show. Mary's expression softened immediately. You poor dear. And in your condition, too. Come inside this instant before you catch your death. Before Bridget could protest, she was ushered into a warm kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Mary bustled about, setting a kettle to boil while Zeke disappeared upstairs with her trunk. You'll stay in our guest room, Mary said firmly, pressing a warm mug of tea into Bridget's hands. How far along are you, if you don't mind my asking? 7 months, Bridget replied, gratefully accepting the tea. My husband died of pneumonia this past spring. I was supposed to stay with his cousin in Tulsa, but... She trailed off, the weight of her situation settling heavily on her shoulders. Well, his loss is our gain, Mary said briskly. We could use another pair of hands around here, especially with the baby coming. I help manage the household while Zeke runs the ranch. My husband Daniel is away with a cattle drive to Kansas City, but he'll be back before Christmas. Zeke returned to the kitchen, having shed his wet coat and hat. His dark hair was slightly damp, curling at the nape of his neck. Without the shadow of his hat brim, Bridget could see his face clearly, for the first time handsome in a rugged way, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes despite his serious expression. The room's ready, he said. I've lit the fire in there to warm it up. Thank you, Bridget said softly. Both of you. I don't know what I would have done if no need for that, Zeke interrupted gently. Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone, Mary corrected, giving her brother an approving look. Now, Mrs. Walters, please call me Bridget. Bridget, Mary smiled. Let's get you into some dry clothes. I have a nightgown that should fit over your belly, and tomorrow we can see about adjusting some of my dresses for you. As Mary led her upstairs, Bridget glanced back at Zeke, who stood watching them from the kitchen doorway. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the first tentative thread of connection. That night, lying in a stranger's bed but feeling safer than she had in months, Bridget placed her hands on her rounded belly and felt her baby kick. We might be okay after all, little one, she whispered into the darkness. The next morning, Bridget woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she was back in her small house in Missouri with Samuel. Reality returned swiftly. Samuel was gone, and she was in a stranger's home in Indian Territory, reliant on their charity. She dressed quickly in the clothes Mary had left for her, a simple cotton dress with the waist let out to accommodate her condition. When she descended the stairs, she found the kitchen empty save for Zeke, who sat at the table with a cup of coffee, studying what appeared to be a ledger. He looked up at her entrance, closing the book. Good morning, Mrs. Walters. Did you sleep well? Yes, thank you, Bridget replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She tucked a stray curl behind her ear. And please call me Bridget, Zeke nodded, pouring her a cup of coffee. Mary's gone to check on our closest neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins. Her youngest has the croup. He gestured to the stove. There's breakfast keeping warm if you're hungry. That's very kind. Bridget helped herself to a modest portion of eggs and bacon, then sat across from Zeke. An awkward silence fell between them. I want to thank you again for your kindness, Bridget finally said. I won't impose on you for long. Once I get to Tulsa, I'm sure I can find work of some kind. Zeke's brow furrowed. In your condition, what kind of work were you thinking? I'm an experienced seamstress, Bridget explained. I can also cook, clean 10 children. And who would tend yours once it arrives? Zeke interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. Winter's coming. Jobs are scarce this time of year, especially for. He trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward her belly. Bridget felt a flash of indignation. I'm not helpless, Mr. Armstrong. Never said you were, he replied calmly. But you don't have to do everything alone either. Before Bridget could respond, the kitchen door opened and Mary swept in, bringing with her a blast of cold air. Mrs. Jenkins' boy is much better, she announced, unwinding her scarf. Oh, you're up, Bridget. Good. I was thinking we could go through some of the baby things I've been collecting. Daniel and I have been married 3 years with no luck yet, but I keep hoping. She patted her flat stomach wistfully. I should earn my keep while I'm here, Bridget insisted, looking from Mary to Zeke. I notice your curtains could use mending and I'd be happy to help with the cooking. Mary beamed. That would be wonderful, and perhaps you could help with the bookkeeping. Zeke is hopeless with numbers and I've been too busy with the harvest preserving. I'm not hopeless, Zeke grumbled, but there was no real annoyance in his tone, just particular about how I count. You can't be particular with arithmetic, brother dear, Mary retorted, winking at Bridget. Either the sums are right or they're wrong. Bridget couldn't help but smile at their banter, reminded of her own siblings back in Ohio, whom she hadn't seen since her marriage 4 years ago. The thought of them sobered her. Would they even know of Samuel's death? Would they care? I'd be happy to look at your books, she offered to Zeke. Before I married, I helped my father with his mercantile accounts. A look of relief crossed Zeke's face. That would be much appreciated. And so began Bridget's stay at Armstrong Ranch. Days turned into weeks, and October gave way to November. The rhythm of ranch life was soothing to Bridget, so different from the cramped mining town where she'd lived with Samuel. Here, there was space to breathe, to think, to heal. She discovered that the Armstrong siblings had lost their parents 5 years earlier to influenza, leaving Zeke, then 23, to run the ranch and look after his younger sister. Mary had married Daniel Thompson the following year, but the couple lived at the ranch since Daniel often worked as a trail hand for extra income. Each evening, after the day's work was done, they gathered in the sitting room. Mary would sew or mend, Zeke would read aloud from a book or newspaper, and Bridget would listen while working on a quilt for her baby. These quiet moments became precious to her, a respite from the grief and uncertainty that had shadowed her since Samuel's death. As her belly grew larger, Bridget found herself watching Zeke when he wasn't looking, the way his strong hands turned the pages of his book, the small smile that would appear when he read something amusing, the thoughtful expression he wore when discussing the day's events. She told herself it was merely appreciation for his kindness, nothing more. But sometimes she would catch him watching her too, his blue eyes quickly darting away when she noticed. Those moments left her feeling both unsettled and strangely hopeful, emotions she wasn't ready to examine too closely. One morning in late November, Bridget was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when a sharp pain seized her lower back. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table as it intensified, then gradually subsided. Bridget, Zeke stood in the doorway, concern etched on his face. Are you all right? Just a twinge, she assured him, straightening. The baby's been restless today. Zeke hesitated, clearly unconvinced. Mary's gone to town for supplies. Should I ride and fetch her back? There's no need, Bridget began, but another pain cut her words short, this one stronger than the first. When it passed, she looked up to find Zeke beside her, one hand hovering near her elbow. That wasn't just a twinge, he said quietly. Is it time? Bridget shook her head, fear rising in her throat. It's too early. The baby's not due for another month. Babies come when they decide to come, Zeke said, his voice surprisingly calm. My father was the only doctor for 20 miles around. I've helped deliver more calves and foals than I can count, and a few human babies too when Pa needed an extra pair of hands. Another pain gripped Bridget, and this time she couldn't hold back a small cry. When it passed, she nodded. I think you should fetch Mary. I'll do better than that, Zeke said, guiding her to a chair. I'll fetch Mrs. Parker from the neighboring farm. She's brought more babies into this world than anyone in the county. By the time Zeke returned with the midwife, a stout, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, Bridget's pains were coming regularly. Mary arrived shortly after, having met a ranch hand Zeke had sent to intercept her on the road. What followed was 18 hours of the hardest work Bridget had ever done. Through it all, Mary stayed by her side, wiping her brow and offering encouragement. Mrs. Parker directed proceedings with calm efficiency, and to Bridget's surprise, Zeke remained in the house instead of making himself scarce, as most men would have done. In the darkest hours, when Bridget's strength was failing and she cried out for Samuel, it was Zeke's deep voice outside the door that steadied her. You can do this, Bridget, he called. You're the strongest woman I know. Those words gave her the courage to push one final time, and at dawn on November 28, 1882, her son entered the world with a lusty cry. A fine, healthy boy, Mrs. Parker announced, placing the swaddled infant in Bridget's arms. Small but strong. Tears streamed down Bridget's face as she gazed at her son. He had Samuel's dark hair but her own green eyes blinking up at her in bewilderment. Hello, little one, she whispered. I'm your mama. Mary, her own eyes wet, squeezed Bridget's shoulder. He's beautiful. What will you call him? Bridget had planned to name a son after Samuel, but looking at this new life, this fresh start, she reconsidered. James, she decided. James Samuel Walters. After Mrs. Parker had gone and Mary had helped clean up, Zeke was permitted to enter. He approached the bed hesitantly, his usual confidence absent as he gazed at the tiny bundle in Bridget's arms. Would you like to hold him? Bridget asked impulsively. Zeke looked startled but nodded. With surprising gentleness, he took James into his arms, cradling him with practiced ease. The baby looked impossibly small against Zeke's broad chest. He's perfect, Zeke said softly, his finger tracing the baby's cheek. You did real good, Bridget. Something about the way he looked at James with such tenderness and wonder made Bridget's heart contract. For the briefest moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where Zeke was more than just her benefactor, where James was their son. She pushed the thought away, blaming it on exhaustion and the overwhelming emotions of childbirth. She was a widow still mourning her husband. Zeke was a kind man who had offered shelter to a stranger in need. That was all. But when Zeke reluctantly handed James back, their fingers brushed, and the jolt that passed between them suggested otherwise. The weeks following James's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and bleary-eyed days for Bridget. Despite being born early, James proved to be a healthy, demanding infant with a powerful set of lungs. Mary was a godsend, stepping in to care for the baby when Bridget needed rest, teaching her the tricks of motherhood that Bridget's own mother wasn't there to share. Zeke, too, surprised her with his involvement. Unlike most men, who viewed infants as strictly women's domain until they were old enough to do chores, Zeke seemed genuinely interested in James. He would hold the baby in the evenings, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, telling him stories about the ranch and the animals. He won't remember any of this, Bridget observed one evening as Zeke patiently explained cattle breeding to a wide-eyed James. Maybe not, Zeke agreed, but a man's never too young to learn about ranching. The casual way he referred to James becoming a man someday, the assumption that they would still be in each other's lives years from now, gave Bridget pause. She had been at Armstrong Ranch for nearly 2 months, far longer than the brief stay she had initially intended. "I should be making plans to leave," she said abruptly. "James is strong enough to travel now, and I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Zeke's expression shifted, a shadow crossing his face. "There's no need to rush off. Winter's setting in, and traveling with an infant would be difficult." "But I can't stay here indefinitely," Bridget insisted. "I need to establish my own home, find work, stay until spring," Zeke interrupted, his voice low and urgent. He cleared his throat, continuing more calmly. "At least stay until Daniel returns. He should be back before Christmas, and then we can discuss your options." Before Bridget could respond, Mary entered the sitting room, her face alight with excitement. "Bridget, a letter came for you while Zeke was in town. It's from Ohio." Bridget took the envelope with trembling hands. It had been forwarded from her address in Missouri, passed through several hands before reaching her. She recognized her sister's handwriting immediately. The letter was brief, but heartfelt. Her family had only recently learned of Samuel's death through a mutual acquaintance. They were distraught that Bridget had faced such hardship alone, and insisted she return to Ohio, where they would help her raise the baby. "My family wants me to come home," Bridget said, looking up from the letter. "They'll take us in, James and me." Mary's face fell, but she quickly masked her disappointment with a smile. "Oh, that's wonderful news, Bridget. Family is important." Zeke said nothing, his expression unreadable as he handed James back to Bridget and strode from the room. That night, Bridget lay awake long after James had fallen asleep in the cradle beside her bed. The prospect of returning to Ohio should have brought relief. There would be family to help her, familiar surroundings, security for her son. Instead, she felt an inexplicable reluctance, as if something essential would be left behind if she left Armstrong Ranch. A soft knock at her door roused her from these thoughts. "Bridget, are you awake?" It was Mary. "Come in," Bridget called softly, careful not to wake James. Mary entered, carrying a steaming cup of tea. She sat on the edge of the bed and handed it to Bridget. "Chamomile. I thought it might help you sleep." "Thank you." Bridget sipped the fragrant tea. "How did you know I was awake?" "The same way I know my brother hasn't slept a wink either," Mary replied with a small smile. "The floors in this old house creak when people pace." Bridget set down her tea, suddenly alert. "Zeke is upset." "Upset isn't the word I'd use," Mary said carefully. "Devastated might be closer." "Because of me? I don't understand," Mary sighed, patting Bridget's hand. "For someone so observant, you can be remarkably blind, my dear." "My brother is in love with you." Bridget stared at her, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. That's not possible. We barely know each other." "He's known you long enough to see what I see, a strong, kind woman who's faced more hardship than most but hasn't let it break her spirit." Mary squeezed Bridget's hand. "And you've seen enough of him to know he's a good man. The way you look at him when you think no one's watching tells me you feel something too." "Even if I did," Bridget whispered, her throat tight with emotion, "it's too soon. Samuel's been gone less than a year. I have James to think about." "Of course," Mary agreed. "I'm not suggesting you rush into anything, but don't make a decision about Ohio without considering all your heart is telling you." With those words, Mary left Bridget alone with her thoughts and the sleeping baby, whose tiny features had begun to look more like his father's with each passing day. Samuel had been a good husband, kind, hardworking, devoted. Their marriage had been one of mutual respect and companionship, if not the grand passion depicted in novels. What she felt for Zeke was different, unsettling in its intensity, frightening in its potential. She was a mother now. She couldn't afford to make decisions based on fluttering hearts and stolen glances. And yet, as dawn broke over the Oklahoma prairie, Bridget wondered if perhaps the bravest choice wasn't always the most cautious one. December arrived with a biting cold that kept the household largely confined indoors. Zeke spent his days tending to the livestock and making repairs around the ranch, coming inside only for meals, which he ate quickly before returning to his work. He was unfailingly polite to Bridget, but maintained a distance that hadn't been there before. A week before Christmas, a fierce blizzard descended on the territory, howling winds driving snow against the windows with such force that Bridget feared the glass might shatter. She sat in the kitchen, James sleeping contentedly in a basket nearby, as she helped Mary prepare preserves. "I'm worried about Zeke," Mary confessed, glancing toward the window. "He went to check the north pasture fence hours ago." As if summoned by her concern, the back door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a half-frozen Zeke. He stamped his boots and shook off his coat, his face red from cold. "You're just in time," Mary said brightly, relief evident in her voice. "Bridget made stew." "Smells good," Zeke acknowledged with a nod to Bridget. "But I can't stay. The Dawson place lost part of their roof in the storm. Their youngest girl is sick and they need help before nightfall." "Zeke Armstrong, you cannot go back out in this weather," Mary protested. "Send one of the hands." "They're all securing our own buildings and livestock," Zeke replied, already pulling his barely dried coat back on. "The Dawsons have no one else to turn to." "Then I'm coming with you," Bridget said suddenly, rising from her chair. "If there's a sick child, they'll need someone to tend to her while the men work on the roof." Zeke turned to her, clearly about to refuse, but something in her expression stopped him. "It's dangerous," he said instead. "So is leaving a family exposed to this storm," Bridget countered. "Mary can watch James. He's just been fed and should sleep for hours." Mary looked between them, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I'll take good care of him. You two go help the Dawsons." 20 minutes later, bundled in every warm garment she owned, Bridget found herself in the Armstrongs' sturdiest wagon beside Zeke, peering through the curtain of snow as they made their way slowly along the barely visible road. "Thank you for coming," Zeke said after they had traveled in silence for some time. "The Dawsons will appreciate a woman's help." "I didn't do it for them," Bridget admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I did it for you. You shouldn't have to face this alone." Zeke's hands tightened on the reins. "Bridget, I'm not going to Ohio," she blurted out, "at least not right away." He turned to look at her, snow collecting on the brim of his hat. "What changed your mind? James deserves to know this land, these people," she said carefully. "And I've come to care for this place, for the people in it." She met his gaze steadily. "For you, Zeke." The wagon hit a rut, jolting them both and breaking the moment. Zeke returned his attention to the treacherous road, but Bridget caught the ghost of a smile on his lips. "We'll talk more after we've helped the Dawsons," he promised. And for now, that was enough. The Dawson family's situation was indeed dire. Their small homestead, consisting of a cabin and barn, had lost a significant portion of the main roof in the storm. Mr. Dawson, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, had managed to stretch a tarp over the gap, but it was a temporary measure at best. Inside, Mrs. Dawson tended to their 3 children, the youngest of whom, a girl no more than 4, lay feverish on a pallet near the fireplace. The cabin was bitterly cold where the wind found its way through the makeshift covering. While Zeke and Mr. Dawson immediately set to work repairing the roof, Bridget helped Mrs. Dawson care for the children and prepare what meager food they had. The little girl, Emma, had what appeared to be a severe cold, her breathing labored and her small body racked with coughing fits. "We ran out of honey for her cough yesterday," Mrs. Dawson explained, her voice tight with worry. "And the willow bark tea isn't bringing down her fever." Bridget rummaged through the supplies she had brought, finding a jar of honey and some dried herbs Mary had packed. "Let's make a fresh poultice for her chest," she suggested. "And I have enough honey to last several days." As she worked, Bridget was acutely aware of how easily this could have been her situation alone with James in a remote cabin, at the mercy of the elements and illness, with no one to turn to for help. The thought strengthened her resolve to build a more secure life for her son, whatever that might entail. By nightfall, Zeke and Mr. Dawson had managed to secure a more substantial covering over the damaged roof. It wouldn't last the winter, but it would hold until better weather allowed for proper repairs. Zeke had also promised to return with additional supplies and help as soon as the storm abated. Emma's fever had broken, much to everyone's relief, and the other children were tucked into bed, warmer now that the worst of the drafts had been sealed. "We can't thank you enough," Mrs. Dawson said tearfully as Bridget and Zeke prepared to leave. "You've saved our lives today." "Neighbors help neighbors," Zeke replied simply. But the way his eyes sought out Bridget suggested his actions were motivated by more than just community duty. The journey back to Armstrong Ranch was even more treacherous, the darkness making it nearly impossible to see the road. Halfway home, the wagon wheel caught in a deep drift, jolting to a stop. "We're stuck," Zeke announced after a futile attempt to urge the horses forward. "I'll have to dig us out." He jumped down into snow that reached above his knees and began clearing around the wheels. Bridget joined him, ignoring his protests that she should stay in the wagon. "4 hands work faster than 2, she insisted, scooping away the heavy snow with determination. They worked side by side, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air until finally the wheel was free. Exhausted and chilled to the bone, they climbed back into the wagon. "You're shivering," Zeke observed, concern evident in his voice. "So are you," Bridget countered, noting the way his hands trembled on the reins. Without warning, Zeke pulled the wagon to a stop, secured the brake and turned to her. "Come here," he said softly, opening his arms. Bridget hesitated only a moment before sliding across the seat into his embrace. He wrapped his coat around both of them as best he could, his body heat a blessed relief against the biting cold. "Better?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. "Yes," she whispered, acutely aware of his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. They remained that way for several long moments, neither speaking, as the storm raged around their small haven. When Zeke finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I know it's too soon," he said. "I know you're still grieving and James is your priority. But I want you to know that if you stayed not just until spring, but permanently, I would do everything in my power to make you and James happy." Bridget pulled back slightly to look up at him, snowflakes catching on her eyelashes. "Are you proposing, Zeke Armstrong?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not yet. That wouldn't be proper with you being a recent widow, but I am declaring my intentions so you can consider all your options before making a decision about Ohio." Bridget considered his words, her heart racing. "And if I stay, what then?" "Then we take our time," Zeke replied, brushing a snowflake from her cheek with his thumb. "We get to know each other better. James grows stronger, and when you're ready, if you ever are, I'll be waiting. And if I'm never ready?" Bridget asked, needing to know that this wasn't merely kindness or pity motivating him. "Then I'll still be honored to have you and James as part of our household," Zeke said firmly. "Your friendship alone is worth more to me than you know." Overwhelmed by his sincerity, Bridget did something she would never have imagined doing just hours earlier. She leaned up and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but it sent warmth coursing through her that had nothing to do with shared body heat. When she pulled away, Zeke looked stunned, then broke into a smile that transformed his entire face. "We should get home," he said, reluctantly releasing her to take up the reins again. "Mary will be worried sick." "Yes," Bridget agreed, settling back into her seat but staying close enough that their shoulders touched. "Let's go home." The next morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine white landscape that sparkled in the winter sunshine. Bridget woke early, James's hungry cries rousing her from a deep sleep. As she nursed him, she gazed out the window at the transformed world, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted within her as well. She had kissed Zeke Armstrong. More surprisingly, she wanted to do it again. The realization should have brought guilt. It had been only 9 months since Samuel's death. But instead, Bridget felt a sense of peace. Samuel would have wanted her to find happiness, to provide a stable home for their son. He had been a practical man who valued security above all else. A knock at her door interrupted these thoughts. "Bridget, are you decent?" It was Mary. "Come in," Bridget called, adjusting her nightgown to cover herself as James finished nursing. Mary entered with a breakfast tray. "I thought you might be hungry after yesterday's adventure. Zeke told me what happened at the Dawsons. You were very brave to go out in that storm." "It was the right thing to do," Bridget said, accepting the tray gratefully. "How is Zeke this morning?" "Already out checking the cattle," Mary replied with a knowing smile. "That man never rests." But he seemed different today, happier than I've seen him in a long time. Bridget felt her cheeks warm. "Did he mention anything else about yesterday?" "No," Mary said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But he didn't have to. It's written all over his face." She reached out to stroke James's dark hair. "Have you made a decision about Ohio?" "I'm staying," Bridget said firmly. "At least until spring. After that, we'll see." Mary's face lit up with delight. "Oh, Bridget, that's wonderful news. This house needs a baby's laughter and—" She hesitated, then continued more seriously. "Zeke needs someone who sees him for who he truly is. He's carried so much responsibility since our parents died. He deserves happiness." "I can't promise anything yet," Bridget cautioned. "It's still very soon after Samuel, and James must come first in any decision I make." "Of course," Mary agreed. "But time has a way of healing wounds and clarifying what's truly important." The days leading up to Christmas were filled with preparations. Mary insisted on making it a special celebration, particularly since it would be James's first Christmas, even if he was too young to remember it. She and Bridget decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, baked cookies and pies, and wrapped the few gifts they had managed to procure. On Christmas Eve, a visitor arrived, Mary's husband Daniel, returning a week earlier than expected from his cattle drive. His reunion with Mary was joyful and emotional, the couple embracing in the doorway for long minutes while Zeke looked on with a smile. Daniel Thompson was a tall, lanky man with a ready laugh and an easy manner. He immediately took to Bridget and cooed appropriately over James, declaring him a fine specimen of manhood, even at his tender age. That evening, after a festive dinner, they gathered in the sitting room. A fire crackled in the hearth, and a small pine tree decorated with paper stars and popcorn strings stood in the corner. Outside, snow fell gently, adding to the sense of being in a world apart, safe and warm while winter held the rest of the territory in its grip. Daniel entertained them with tales from the cattle trail, his expressive face and animated gestures bringing the stories to life. Mary watched him adoringly, while Zeke occasionally added a comment or correction when Daniel's storytelling veered into exaggeration. Bridget sat with James in her arms, the baby watching the animated faces around him with fascination. She found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Zeke, who seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him, his usual reserve softened by the festive atmosphere and his brother-in-law's presence. As if sensing her attention, Zeke looked up, meeting her eyes across the room. The warmth in his gaze made her breath catch, and she offered a small smile in return. Later, after Mary and Daniel had retired and James was asleep in his cradle, Bridget found herself alone with Zeke in the sitting room. The fire had burned low, casting a golden glow over the room. "It's good to see Daniel back," Bridget remarked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Mary's been missing him terribly." "He's a good man," Zeke agreed. "Works hard, loves my sister, helps with the ranch when he's here. Can't ask for more than that in a brother-in-law." "Is that why you never objected to them living here after they married?" Bridget asked. "Most men would want their own space," Zeke shrugged. "This place is too big for just me. After our parents died, it felt empty. Having Mary and Daniel here makes it a home again." He paused, adding quietly, "Having you and James here does too." Bridget felt a now familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Zeke, about what happened in the wagon. You don't need to explain," he said quickly. "I understand if you regret it." "I don't," Bridget said firmly. "That's what I wanted to tell you. I don't regret it at all." Zeke's expression softened. "Well, that's good to hear. But I still need time," she continued. "James is my priority, and I'm still coming to terms with being a widow. Whatever grows between us has to develop slowly." "I'm not going anywhere," Zeke assured her, reaching across to take her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. "We have all the time in the world." On Christmas morning, the household was awakened early by Daniel's enthusiastic rendition of "Joy to the World" as he descended the stairs. His good cheer was infectious, and soon everyone was gathered around the tree, exchanging modest gifts. Mary had knitted a warm blanket for James and a scarf for Bridget. Daniel presented Zeke with a fine new hunting knife he'd purchased in Kansas City. Bridget had little to give in return, but she had sewn a new shirt for Zeke from fabric Mary had provided, and handkerchiefs embroidered with everyone's initials. "There's one more gift," Zeke announced when the others had finished. He disappeared briefly, returning with a small wooden object that he placed in Bridget's hands. It was a carefully crafted rocking horse, small enough for a child just learning to sit up. The wood was polished to a soft glow, the mane and tail made of real horsehair. "It won't be of use for a while yet," Zeke explained, suddenly looking uncertain. "But I thought James might enjoy it when he's a bit older." Tears sprang to Bridget's eyes as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "You made this," Zeke nodded. "Been working on it in the evenings." "My father taught me woodworking when I was a boy." The thought of Zeke spending his precious free time crafting a toy for her son touched Bridget deeply. It spoke of commitment, of seeing a future where he would be part of James's life as the boy grew. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "The most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." Mary and Daniel exchanged knowing glances but said nothing, allowing the moment to belong solely to Bridget and Zeke. That night, as the house slept, Bridget stood by James's cradle, watching her son's peaceful face in the moonlight that streamed through the window. He was growing so quickly, already beginning to show the personality that would one day define him as a man. A soft knock drew her attention to the door. Zeke stood there, a hesitant expression on his face. "I saw the light under your door," he explained. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Bridget assured him. "I was just watching him sleep and thinking about the future." Zeke approached, standing beside her to gaze down at James. "He looks more like you than I first thought," he observed. "He has your chin." "And Samuel's nose," Bridget added softly. I hope he'll have good memories to share with him someday of the man his father was. You'll keep Samuel alive for him, Zeke said with certainty. Through your stories and your love. Bridget looked up at him, struck by his understanding. Many men would be jealous of such devotion to a deceased husband, but Zeke seemed to recognize that her past was an essential part of who she was. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. For taking in a stranger that day at the station, for giving us a home, for the beautiful gift you made for James. You're not a stranger anymore, Bridget, Zeke replied, his voice low to avoid waking the baby. You're family now, whether you choose to stay forever or only until spring. Impulsively, Bridget rose on tiptoes and kissed his cheek. Merry Christmas, Zeke. His eyes, so blue in the moonlight, held hers for a long moment. Merry Christmas, Bridget. Winter settled in earnest over the Oklahoma Territory in January 1883. The days were short and often bitterly cold, confining the household to the warmth of the ranch house. Daniel spent his days helping Zeke with the livestock and repairs, while Mary and Bridget managed the household and cared for James, who was growing stronger and more alert by the day. These close quarters might have bred tension, but instead, Bridget found herself increasingly comfortable with the rhythms of life at Armstrong Ranch. Mary became the sister she had missed since leaving Ohio, and Daniel treated her with the same friendly respect he showed his wife. And Zeke. Zeke was becoming something else entirely, not quite a suitor yet, but more than a friend or landlord. He sought her company in the evenings, discussing books or ranch business, or simply sitting in companionable silence. He never pressed for more than she was ready to give, respecting the invisible boundaries she had established. February brought warmer days interspersed with the occasional blizzard. On one such mild afternoon, Bridget bundled James warmly and took him outside for the first time since his birth, eager for him to feel the sunshine on his face. She was walking near the corral, pointing out the horses to a wide-eyed James, when Zeke rode in from checking fence lines. He dismounted smoothly, handing the reins to a ranch hand before approaching them with a smile. His first time outside, Zeke asked, gently tugging the blanket back to see James's face better. Yes, Bridget confirmed. I thought he should see his home in the daylight. Zeke's expression softened at her use of the word home. Would you like to see more of it? I could hitch up the sleigh, take you around the property. The idea was appealing. Bridget had seen little of the ranch beyond the immediate vicinity of the house and barn. I'd like that, she agreed. If you're sure it's not too cold for James. We'll bundle him up good and proper, Zeke assured her, and it's a fine day for February. An hour later, they were gliding across the snow-covered pastures in a sleigh that Zeke had brought out of storage and polished until it gleamed. James, wrapped in multiple blankets, lay contentedly in Bridget's arms, occasionally making soft cooing sounds as they moved. Zeke pointed out landmarks as they traveled the creek that ran through the property, frozen now but teeming with fish in summer. The stand of oak trees that provided shade for the cattle in hot weather, the distant hills where wild horses sometimes roamed. How much land do you have? Bridget asked, impressed by the vastness of the ranch. About 5,000 acres, Zeke replied. Small compared to some, but it's good land. My father purchased the first parcel when this was still officially Indian territory, before the land run. He treated fairly with the Cherokee who lived here, became friends with them, added to it over the years. It's beautiful, Bridget said sincerely, gazing out at the rolling landscape covered in pristine snow. Peaceful. It can be harsh too, Zeke cautioned. Droughts in summer, blizzards in winter, tornadoes in between. But there's something about this land that gets into your blood. He glanced at her. Do you miss Missouri? Bridget considered the question. Not really. The mining town where Samuel and I lived was crowded, dirty. The men worked long hours underground, and the women struggled to keep homes clean of coal dust. She looked down at James's face, pink-cheeked in the cold air. I'm glad he'll know open spaces instead. They had reached the crest of a small hill, and Zeke drew the horses to a halt. The view stretched for miles, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance, snow-covered fields extending to the horizon where they met a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at it. I come here sometimes to think, Zeke said quietly, when decisions need making or troubles need sorting. And does it help? Bridget asked, sensing there was more to his words. Usually, he nodded. Puts things in perspective, makes the big problem seem smaller. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. I've been thinking about your situation, Bridget. Spring will be here before we know it, and you'll need to decide whether to go to Ohio or stay. Bridget's heart quickened. Yes, I suppose I will. If you choose to stay, Zeke continued carefully, you'll need your own place eventually, independence, a way to support yourself and James. A flicker of disappointment passed through Bridget. Was he suggesting she should leave the ranch after all? There's a small cabin on the property, Zeke went on, gesturing toward the west. About a half-mile from the main house. It was the original homestead before my father built the bigger house. It needs work, but it could be made comfortable. You could live there, maybe start a small business sewing or such if that's what you wanted. Bridget studied his face, trying to understand what he was offering. Are you suggesting I become your tenant? No, Zeke said firmly. I'm suggesting you have options beyond just staying in our home as a guest or leaving entirely. I want you to feel you have choices, Bridget, real choices that give you and James security. The thoughtfulness behind his words touched her deeply. He was offering her independence without asking her to leave, a way to maintain her dignity while still remaining close. Thank you, she said softly. I'd like to see this cabin sometime. We can ride over tomorrow if the weather holds, Zeke suggested, his expression brightening. It's not much to look at now, but with some work. I'm sure it has potential, Bridget said, smiling at his enthusiasm. Like many things that just need a little care and attention. Zeke's eyes met hers, understanding the double meaning in her words. Yes, he agreed softly. Exactly like that. James chose that moment to announce his hunger with a demanding cry. Bridget laughed, the serious mood broken. I think that's our cue to head back, she said, adjusting her hold on the baby. He's got good timing, Zeke observed wryly, turning the sleigh around. Always knows when a moment's getting too serious. As they glided back toward the ranch house, Bridget found herself studying Zeke's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hat sat at a slight angle on his dark hair, the small smile that played around his mouth as he handled the reins with practiced ease. For the first time since Samuel's death, Bridget allowed herself to truly imagine a future with another man. Not as a replacement for what she had lost, but as something new and different, a second chance at happiness she had never expected to find. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The following day dawned clear and mild, perfect for the promised visit to the cabin. After breakfast, Zeke hitched the sleigh again while Bridget prepared James for the outing, packing extra blankets and milk she had expressed earlier. Mary, who had been unusually quiet that morning, pulled Bridget aside before they left. Daniel and I have been talking, she said, her expression serious. About the future. Oh, Bridget prompted when Mary paused. He's been offered a position managing a ranch near Tulsa, Mary explained. Good pay, steady work, no more cattle drives. She twisted her hands together nervously. We've decided to accept. Mary, that's wonderful news, Bridget said sincerely, though a pang of sadness shot through her at the thought of losing her friend's daily company. "It means we'll be moving out in the spring," Mary continued, "which leaves Zeke alone in that big house." She gave Bridget a meaningful look. "Unless—" "Mary," Bridget cautioned, "don't get ahead of things. Zeke and I are still figuring things out." "I know," Mary assured her. "And I'm not trying to push. But Zeke mentioned he's showing you the old cabin today, and I just wanted you to know that." "Well, there are other options too." Before Bridget could respond, Zeke called from outside that the sleigh was ready. Mary squeezed her hand. "Just think about it," she whispered. The ride to the cabin was short but beautiful, the sleigh cutting through pristine snow that sparkled in the morning sunlight. James, apparently soothed by the motion, slept peacefully in Bridget's arms. "There it is," Zeke announced as they crested a small rise. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by bare, branched oak trees. It was small but solidly built of logs, with a stone chimney and a covered porch across the front. Years of neglect showed in the sagging roof and weathered exterior, but Bridget could immediately see its potential. "It's lovely," she said as Zeke helped her from the sleigh. "Why has it sat empty all this time?" "We used it for storage after building the main house," Zeke explained, leading her up the path he had cleared earlier. "Then, when my parents died, there were more pressing matters than maintaining an empty cabin." He pushed open the door, which creaked in protest. The interior was dusty, but surprisingly intact, a large room with a fireplace at one end, a small kitchen area at the other, and a ladder leading to what Bridget assumed was a sleeping loft. "It needs a thorough cleaning, new roof, some furniture," Zeke said, watching her face anxiously. "But the structure is sound. My father built things to last." Bridget walked slowly around the space, imagining it cleaned and furnished, curtains at the windows, a rocking chair by the fire, a bed for James, a table where they could take their meals. "It could be quite charming," she admitted. "But it seems very isolated out here, especially with a small child." "It's not as far from the main house as it seems," Zeke assured her. "In good weather, it's an easy walk, and I could install one of those new telephone lines between the houses if you were concerned about emergencies." The thought he had given to her potential concerns touched Bridget. He wasn't simply offering her a building. He was trying to provide her with a safe haven that was still connected to the larger ranch community. "Mary mentioned she and Daniel are moving to Tulsa in the spring," Bridget said casually, watching his reaction. Zeke nodded, his expression guarded. "Daniel told me yesterday. It's a good opportunity for them. She seemed to think you might be lonely in the big house without them." "I managed before they were married," Zeke said with a shrug that didn't quite convey the indifference he clearly intended. "I'll manage again." Bridget moved closer to him, James still sleeping in her arms. "And if I chose to stay in the main house instead of here, would that be an option?" Zeke's eyes widened slightly. "Of course. You and James are welcome to stay as long as you wish, but I thought you might prefer your own space, your independence." "Independence is important," Bridget agreed. "But so is family." She took a deep breath. "Zeke, I've been thinking a great deal about what happens when spring comes, about what's best for James and for me." Zeke stood very still, as if afraid any movement might interrupt her. And I believe we belong here at Armstrong Ranch," Bridget said firmly. "Not necessarily in this cabin, though it's very kind of you to offer it, but here with you." "Bridget," Zeke began, his voice rough with emotion. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that I care for you," she interrupted gently. "More than I thought possible after losing Samuel. I'm saying that when I think of James's future, I want you to be part of it. I'm saying that I'm not ready to make any grand declarations or commitments yet, but I am ready to acknowledge what's growing between us, and to nurture it." Zeke reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished. When she didn't, he cupped her cheek in his palm. "That's more than I dared hope for," he said softly. "It's a beginning," Bridget agreed. "The rest we'll figure out together in time." James stirred between them, making small fussing noises as he woke. Zeke laughed, dropping his hand. "Always interrupting the important moments, this boy." "He's making sure we don't rush things," Bridget said with a smile, adjusting her hold on the now awake infant. "Smart, even at his age." "Like his mother," Zeke observed. He looked around the cabin once more. "So, not this place then?" "Not yet," Bridget replied. "Maybe someday it could be a guest house or a place for James when he's older and wants his independence." "I like the way you think long-term," Zeke said, offering his arm to escort her back to the sleigh. "About staying here, about James growing up." "I've had to learn to think that way," Bridget admitted as they stepped out into the bright winter day. "When you've lost as much as I have, you either give up on the future entirely or you embrace it with both hands. And you've chosen to embrace it," Zeke said with admiration. "I have," Bridget confirmed, looking down at James and then up at Zeke. "With both hands." The remainder of winter passed in a pleasant routine. Zeke worked with his men to prepare the ranch for spring calving, while Bridget and Mary kept the household running smoothly. James thrived, growing chubbier and more alert with each passing week. As the days lengthened and the snow began to melt, revealing patches of muddy ground and the first tentative green shoots, Bridget felt a corresponding growth within herself, a burgeoning confidence in her decision to remain at Armstrong Ranch, in her feelings for Zeke, in her ability to build a new life without betraying the memory of the old one. March brought the first calves, and with them, long days and sometimes nights for Zeke and the ranch hands. Bridget often found herself waiting up, keeping coffee hot and food warm for when he stumbled in, exhausted but exhilarated by the new life springing up around the ranch. One such evening in late March, Zeke returned well past midnight. Bridget, who had been dozing in a chair by the fire, woke at the sound of the door. "You didn't have to wait up," he said softly, removing his muddy boots. "I wanted to," she replied, rising to pour him a cup of coffee. "How many today?" "3 new calves, all healthy," Zeke reported with satisfaction, accepting the coffee gratefully. "How's our boy, our boy?" The casual way he included himself in James's life never failed to warm Bridget's heart. "Cutting a tooth, I think. He's been fussy but finally fell asleep about 2 hours ago." Zeke nodded sympathetically. "Poor little feller, and poor mama dealing with it all day." "Mary's been a great help," Bridget said, leading the way to the kitchen where she had kept a plate of food warm in the oven. "Though she's starting to pack for their move to Tulsa, it's becoming real now." "April 15th, Zeke confirmed, sitting heavily at the table. "That's when they'll go." Bridget set the plate before him slices of roast beef, potatoes, and green beans she had canned last fall. "Will it be strange having them gone?" "Very," Zeke admitted, digging into the food with appreciation. "This house hasn't been this empty since before my parents died." He glanced up at her. "Except for you and James, of course." "Of course," Bridget echoed, sitting across from him. "Zeke, I've been thinking, once Mary and Daniel leave, it might appear improper for me to remain here alone with you." Zeke set down his fork, his expression serious. "I've thought of that too. I would never want to damage your reputation, Bridget." "I know," she assured him. "You've been nothing but respectful, but people talk, especially in small communities." "The cabin could be ready by then," Zeke offered. "If you wanted your own place after all." Bridget shook her head. "That's not what I want." "What do you want?" Zeke asked, his voice low and intent. Bridget took a deep breath. "I want us to be a family, you, me, and James, properly, openly." Zeke stared at her for a long moment as if afraid he had misunderstood. "Bridget, are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Zeke Armstrong," Bridget declared, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I've loved you since that day in the blizzard when you risked your life to help the Dawsons, maybe even before. I've been afraid to admit it, afraid it was too soon after Samuel, afraid of what people might think. But I'm not afraid anymore." Zeke rose from his chair, moving around the table to kneel beside her. He took her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. "I've loved you since the moment I saw you standing alone at that train station," he confessed. "So brave, so determined even when everything seemed lost. I told myself it was just admiration, then friendship, but it's always been more." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing them reverently. "I love you, Bridget Walters. I love James as if he were my own son. I want nothing more than to make you both my family." Tears welled in Bridget's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Then ask me properly, Zeke Armstrong." A smile spread across his face as he understood. Still kneeling, he took both her hands in his. "Bridget Walters, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of allowing me to be a father to James, and perhaps to other children we might be blessed with? Will you build a life with me here on this land, through all the seasons to come?" "Yes," Bridget whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes to all of it." Zeke rose, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as she responded, years of loneliness and longing dissolving in the warmth of their embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Zeke rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked simply. "After Mary and Daniel leave," Bridget decided. "That gives us 3 weeks to prepare, and it feels right to wait until after they've started their new chapter before we begin ours." Zeke nodded agreement. "A small ceremony here at the ranch. Perfect," Bridget smiled. "Just family and a few friends." As if sensing the momentous decision that had just been made, James's cry echoed from upstairs. Bridget laughed softly. "Your son has impeccable timing." "Our son," Zeke corrected, pressing one more kiss to her forehead before releasing her. "Go to him. I'll finish my supper and be up shortly." As Bridget climbed the stairs to comfort James, her heart felt lighter than it had in over a year. The future stretched before her, not as a lonely path to be walked in grief, but as a journey to be shared with a man who loved her and the child who depended on her. In the quiet of James's room, as she lifted her son from his cradle and held him close, Bridget whispered, "We're home, little one. Truly home at last." On April 22, 1883, a small group gathered in the front parlor of Armstrong Ranch. The room had been decorated with spring wildflowers, and sunshine streamed through the windows, creating pools of golden light on the polished wooden floor. Reverend Tucker from the church in Claremore stood before the fireplace, Bible in hand. Mary and Daniel Thompson, having delayed their departure for Tulsa by a week for this occasion, stood as witnesses. Several neighboring ranchers and their wives filled the remaining space, along with Mrs. Parker, the midwife who had delivered James. Bridget waited in the upstairs hallway, her heart racing with anticipation. She wore a simple gown of ivory silk that Mary had helped her remake from one of Mrs. Armstrong's old dresses found in a trunk in the attic. Her hair was arranged in a loose knot at the nape of her neck, adorned with small white flowers. James, now nearly 5 months old, had been bathed and dressed in a new white gown. He rested contentedly in Mary's arms, apparently understanding the importance of the occasion. "It's time," Mary whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Oh, Bridget, you look beautiful. Zeke won't know what hit him." Bridget took a deep breath, smoothing her skirts one last time. "I never thought I'd have this again," she confessed. "A chance at love, at family." "Life has a way of surprising us," Mary replied, adjusting James in her arms. "Sometimes with heartbreak, but sometimes with joy beyond measure." She leaned forward to kiss Bridget's cheek. "Welcome to the family, sister." Together they descended the stairs. A hush fell over the gathered guests as Bridget appeared in the parlor doorway. But Bridget saw only Zeke, standing tall and proud by the fireplace, dressed in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his face cleanly shaven. The look of wonder and love that transformed his features as he beheld her was something Bridget knew she would remember until her dying day. She walked toward him slowly, savoring each step of this journey from widowhood to new beginnings. When she reached his side, he took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Tucker began, his voice filling the room, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple gold bands that Zeke had purchased on a trip to Tulsa. When prompted, they spoke their vows clearly, promises to love and cherish each other through all the seasons of life to come. "By the authority vested in me," the Reverend concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Armstrong, you may kiss your bride." Zeke cupped Bridget's face gently in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. The small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. Mary stepped forward with James, who was beginning to fuss. "I think someone wants to congratulate his parents," she said, placing the baby in Bridget's arms. Zeke wrapped an arm around Bridget's waist, his other hand coming to rest on James's head. "We're officially a family now, little man," he said softly. The celebration that followed was joyful but modest, a dinner prepared by Mary and the neighboring women, a cake decorated with spring flowers, toasts offered by Daniel and the other ranchers. As twilight fell, the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds with Mary and Daniel for their last evening together before the Thompsons' departure for Tulsa. "To new beginnings," Daniel proposed as they shared a final glass of wine in the sitting room. "For all of us." "To family," Mary added, "both the ones we're born to and the ones we create." "To love," Bridget said softly, looking at her new husband, "which finds us even when we've stopped looking for it." "To coming home," Zeke concluded, his arm tightening around Bridget's shoulders. "For that's what you've given me, Bridget Armstrong, a sense of truly being home at last." Later that night, after Mary and Daniel had retired and James was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Zeke led Bridget to the master bedroom, a room she had helped air and refresh over the past week, but had never slept in. "My parents were happy here," Zeke said as he closed the door behind them. "I hope we will be too." "We already are," Bridget assured him, reaching up to loosen his tie. "This is just the beginning." Their coming together as husband and wife was everything Bridget had hoped for, tender and passionate, marked by discovery and joy. Afterward, lying in Zeke's arms as moonlight spilled through the curtains, Bridget felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find again. "What are you thinking?" Zeke murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That life is strange and wonderful," Bridget replied truthfully. "6 months ago, I was a pregnant widow waiting beside the tracks with no idea where I would go or how I would manage. And then you appeared, lifted my trunk and said, 'Let's go home.'" "Best decision I ever made," Zeke said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "For both of us," Bridget agreed, nestling closer into his embrace. The years that followed brought changes to Armstrong Ranch. Mary and Daniel thrived in Tulsa, where he eventually became manager of one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. They visited often, especially after they were blessed with twin daughters in 1885. James grew from an infant to a sturdy toddler with his mother's green eyes and his adoptive father's love of the outdoors. Zeke formally adopted him on his first birthday, though James had been calling him Papa since he began to speak. In the summer of 1884, Bridget gave birth to a son they named William, after Zeke's father. 2 years later, a daughter followed Elizabeth, called Libby by everyone except her grandmother in Ohio, who insisted on using her full name in the letters she sent regularly. Zeke expanded the ranch operations, adding sheep and horses to the cattle. Bridget started a small dressmaking business that served the growing community around them as Oklahoma moved toward statehood. The old cabin that Zeke had once offered to Bridget became a schoolhouse for their children and those of neighboring ranchers, with a teacher brought in from Tulsa who boarded with them during the week. Through droughts and blizzards, good years and lean ones, their love remained constant, a shelter from life's storms, a source of strength in difficult times, a wellspring of joy in moments of celebration. On a warm autumn evening in 1892, 10 years after Bridget had first arrived in Oklahoma, she sat on the front porch of Armstrong Ranch, watching Zeke teach 8-year-old James and 6-year-old William how to throw a lasso. Libby, now 4, sat at her feet, carefully stringing wildflowers into a crown. "Mama, tell me again how you and Papa met," Libby requested, a question she asked at least once a week. Bridget smiled, running her fingers through her daughter's dark curls so like her father's. "Well, sweetheart, I was waiting at the train station in Claremore. It was getting dark and I was all alone with just my trunk. And you were going to have James," Libby interjected excitedly. "That's right. I was going to have James very soon, and I was worried because the person who was supposed to meet me never came. And then Papa rode up on his horse," Libby continued, familiar with every detail of the story. "Yes, he did. He looked so handsome and kind. He lifted my trunk like it weighed nothing at all, put it on his horse and said, 'Let's go home,'" Libby finished triumphantly. "Exactly right," Bridget confirmed, her gaze drifting to where Zeke now stood with an arm around each boy's shoulders, patiently demonstrating the proper technique for coiling a rope. As if sensing her attention, Zeke looked up, meeting her eyes across the yard. Even after all these years, the love in his gaze made her heart quicken. "And did you know right away that you would marry him?" Libby asked, placing the completed flower crown on her head. Bridget considered this. "Not right away," she admitted. "But I knew he was a good man, and that I felt safe with him. Sometimes love grows slowly, like a garden. You plant the seeds and with care and patience, something beautiful blooms." "Like our garden?" Libby asked, gesturing toward the kitchen garden where vegetables and flowers grew in abundance. "Very much like our garden," Bridget agreed. Zeke called the boys in for supper, and as they all gathered around the large kitchen table, a family created by chance, choice, and love, Bridget felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. From a pregnant widow waiting beside the tracks to the beloved matriarch of Armstrong Ranch, her life had come full circle. The grief and uncertainty of those early days hadn't disappeared entirely. She still thought of Samuel occasionally, still wrote to his parents in Missouri, still made sure James knew about his birth father. But those memories no longer carried pain, only a gentle acknowledgement of a life once lived, and the unexpected blessings that had emerged from loss. As Zeke said grace, his deep voice filling the kitchen with words of thankfulness for family and home, Bridget added her own silent prayer gratitude for second chances, for the courage to begin again, and for the cowboy who had lifted her trunk that fateful day and offered her not just shelter, but a lifetime of love. "Let's go home," he had said, and home they had gone together.